Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. I can't believe it's already the end of 2024, and today I'm very excited to show you the art supplies that I discovered this year. And I also want to show you how I like to use them. I know many of you love this kind of videos. It's the type of video I love to watch myself. So go grab your snacks or drinks, we're gonna have a great time. Starting with drawing, I have been loving this Canson 5057 drawing paper. It's my go-to practice paper. And I use this paper for pretty much everything from pencil to ink to watercolor and gouache. It's very similar to the Royal Talens sketchbook, the main difference being it's very white. Unlike the warm cream color of Royal Talens, I much prefer a cool white paper. I've been using this paper since 2023. I made my own sketchbooks back then. I used to use alcohol marker with it. I also went to live drawing class with it. I take notes and plan my trip with it. And this year I started to make sketchbooks with sewing machine. They're not exactly sketchbooks, it's just like pieces of paper, usually 7 or 8 pieces of paper sewn together. Because I don't want them to feel too precious, because I know I need to go through a lot of paper like this to learn and grow. And I just use a clipboard as the back support, so they don't feel too flimsy to work with. And for drawing, I discovered the carpenter's pencil this year. It's made for carpenters to make marks through a hole in the wood, and because it has a very long and narrow tip, I feel like I can be very loose with it and use it in a very playful way. Another pencil I've been using a lot is this 2mm lead holder. Because I've been using a lot of hot pressed watercolor paper this year, I feel like the thicker lead is less likely to damage the paper, so I like to keep it quite blunt. It comes with a sharpener, so I can sharpen it if I want to, but I almost never need to do it. If I want to draw something with pencil, I would just use the polychromo's black colored pencil. I talked about this last year as well, and you can tell it's getting a bit short now. I find it to be more pleasant than other pencils I tried, even the black wing pencils. And same with the eraser I like to use before. I'm very happy with my trusty Faber Castell dust-free eraser. I love how these erasers, they don't become stiff or abrasive over time like some other erasers can be, so I'm super happy with the quality. Another favorite item from last year is the Caran Neocolor 2 water-soluble crayons. I use these instead of alcohol markers for value studies. They don't smudge like oil pastels, and I really like their consistency. And I've also been using this Pentel brush sign pen. It doesn't say it's waterproof or anything, but it doesn't disappear completely when I use watercolor over it. So sometimes I use it for sketching on watercolor paper when I don't want the sketch to be too visible. And this year I also started to use the soft kneadable eraser on my watercolor papers. It's really great for lighten the pencil sketch. And I also use it to stick onto the bottom of watercolor half pans, so when I push it down it sticks to the tin very well. Like all my half pans are very securely attached in there. Moving on to ink pens, my go-to fountain pen is still my Lamy Safari with 1.1 and 1.5 calligraphy nib. They're really affordable, lightweight, and the line variations are great. Same with the Sailor Fude nib with 40 degree. I also use this one quite often. The new addition to my favorite list is this Twisby Eco Pen with fine nib. I bought this one in 2023, but I didn't like it at first. Because of the design, it felt slightly top heavy if I'm to post it, so it took me a while to get used to that. But my favorite thing about this pen is that it has such a buttery smooth ink flow. It's just very simple and straightforward. For ink, I only bought one bottle of ink this year, and that is the document ink in the color brown. Last year I mentioned I had to mix my own brown ink because I found the pigment ink a bit too red, and the viewer suggested that I try this one. So I bought this bottle when I had the chance. I tried it, I really like this ink. It's just a perfect brown color I always wanted. Another important accessory I feel like to mention is this glove for digital painting. I always put it on when I'm inking on watercolor paper because I very often use hand lotion. I don't want that to stick to the paper, so it would repel water. So I strongly recommend this if you have the same problem. Now we're moving on to palettes. The one I use the most this year is this R2 Kit Folio palette. You can tell this one is well loved. It is my absolute favorite. It's very convenient, especially for filming on my desk. It's very easy to include in the frame so you guys can see how I mix my colors, and I just don't have anything to complain about it. Many of you have also asked about this seashell ceramic palette. If you live in Europe, they might have a store in your country. They sometimes have pretty interesting art accessories, and the price are quite affordable too. It's just that their products can come and go. So unfortunately, this palette is no longer available, but they might come back in the future. So for me, I like to use this palette for all my heavily granulating colors. I'm someone who doesn't like granulating colors enough to include them in my regular palettes, so I keep them in one place and take it out if I feel for it. So the paints in here, they're not my favorite. I actually regret most, if not all, the purchase here, but that's a topic for another day. The palette is what I like. The next palette, I've been keeping it secret for a bit because I wanted to have a proper debut. So this is a birthday present from my mom, but I did choose it for myself. She just bought it and sent it to me. I haven't used it much because I just got it for about 1 or 2 weeks. But I can already see the potential to use it with gouache. It has 20 slots, so I can keep the colors separated without letting them contaminate each other. And I also think it's just really pretty to look at. For my fresh gouache, I like to keep them in this airtight box. It worked really great for me and I never got any mold in it. However, it's not designed to be upright. I traveled with it once and I put it vertically in my bag. It didn't leak outside the box, thank goodness, but it cross-contaminated each other very badly. It might be very obvious that it's not sealed in between the colors, but I just had no idea at the time. The next ceramic palette, I think this one was sold as a plate for food. I was planning to use it for mixing paint, but I think the surface is a bit too small for the size I like to paint. So I like to use this one for putting oil pastels while I'm painting. I usually plan the colors I want to use first, and then I put them in this tray, so I don't get overwhelmed by too many colors. And afterwards, I can just wipe it down with some kitchen towel. Oil pastels on ceramic is surprisingly easy to clean, so this one is now designated to oil pastels. The next one might look a bit boring. It's just a normal watercolor tin, but I like to use it to carry my watercolor brushes and my paint in one place. I love how convenient it is. And my brushes are protected as long as I don't store them upside down. So this is actually my preferred travel palette. I am in the process of switching to the Lightwish palette here because this one has 5 slots instead of 4, so I can keep more colors in there. Next year I will be switching to this one. Since my 2 favorite watercolor brushes are just a bit too big to fit in here, I think I'll have to cut off the ends of these brushes to make them fit. So they're gonna turn into Cinderella's stepsisters. I just couldn't bear to do it yet. It feels painful to think about it, so we'll see. The last palette is what I'm using almost every day right now. A few weeks ago, I put together this palette with mostly honey-based watercolor paints. It is for me to use during the drier winter months, and I'm so happy with this palette. I feel like I'm getting pretty close to say I don't need anything more. I have what I love and I love what I have. Although there are a few amgram colors that I only have the sample size right now. And that leads to my favorite watercolor paint for 2024. I have discovered so many different brands this year. If I have to choose one winner, I think it would be amgram. I think their consistency is just heavenly to work with. Their pigment load, their vibrancy, and the mild granulation. Everything feels so right to me. It makes me feel like I have found the one. However, they don't have all the colors I want to have, especially the more opaque pastel-like colors. And also, they're really expensive from where I live. I also have to order them from Jackson's, so I'm not gonna start hoarding just yet. Here I have chosen a few different colors from all the brands I discovered this year. I just wanted to look at them all together in one place. It's pretty obvious that I'm loving the pastel opaque watercolors this year. I think I might be a bit influenced by this Domestica course. This artist, she has a really gorgeous palette. Not quite sure if they're a handmade watercolor. I think I saw some Old Holland in there. Her palette is really adorable and her paintings are adorable. And this year I also learned that I'm a bit particular about opaque watercolors. I don't really like it when earthy colors are opaque. I prefer transparent browns. I'm not a big fan of Indian red or opaque yellow ochre. It's just a personal thing. And if you're wondering why I crossed over some of the colors, it's just because I like the colors, but I don't plan to keep them in the future. Sap Green from Daniel Smith has nickel in it, and Sennelier's Naples Yellow has cadmium in it, so I'm going to replace them soon. I am replacing the Naples Yellow with Schminke's John Yellow Deep. For the Chromium Yellow Hue Light from Schminke, it doesn't have a very great light fast rating, and it did show some signs of fading in the light washes, so I'm going to stop using this one. Moving on to papers, I think my top 1 company for watercolor paper is this company that makes Saunders Waterford and Bockingford paper. I like them both a lot. Their 100% cotton line, which is the Saunders Waterford, I like their hot press, cold press, and rough paper. They're really fantastic. I made this sketchbook last year with their rough paper, and I really enjoyed using it. And these are painted with their hot press paper. This one I used oil pastel over the watercolor and I really liked it, but I just want to quickly clarify that I painted this one around the American election time, and someone thought that I was being a Trump supporter, so I just want to say that's completely not what my intentions are. I just had no idea about the rockets politics connection at the time. I guess I was being insensitive, and I felt quite stupid afterwards. I only painted this because the shape of the fog was really pretty. This one is a more recent portrait. This one is on their cold press paper. And earlier this year, I made a sketchbook. It's a double-sided sketchbook with cold press paper on one side and hot press paper on the other side. I ran into some issues with the hot press paper. It turns out that when the paper is exposed to moisture, the sizing can be easily damaged. The colors just don't blend on the page no matter what I do. I bought these paper in large sheets from the store, and it's likely that they have already been exposed to moisture for a while. The sizing was already damaged the day I bought it. As you can see here, some places the watermarks are just not intentional. So I used most of these paper for gouache studies. Now I just keep the hot press paper in an airtight bag. I also put a pack of food desiccant in there to make sure they don't get damaged over time. Their cold press paper and rough paper don't seem to have this problem. They're completely fine to use as sketchbooks. The hot press paper is still my go-to if I want to paint oil pastels over watercolor. Their texture is just perfect for that. As for the Bockingford paper, I have tried their cold press and hot press before, and I really love the smooth but not glossy texture. I got this spiral bound sketchbook in London about 2 months ago, and I haven't got much chance to work in it just yet. So too bad I don't have a lot of paintings to show for this paper, but I hope you can still make a judgment of the quality. The next brand I can really recommend is hahnemuhle. This is a brand from Germany. They often come up with very unique ideas for watercolor paper. I'm still loving their torchon paper I mentioned last year. And this is what I painted with them. The texture is rough, but still smooth enough for ink pens, which I really appreciate. And I love this paper for its cool, bright white color. They also made paper with agave cotton fiber blend. Like I said, they can be very experimental with their paper, and they just made a new paper with sugarcane fiber, which I'm dying to try. And I realized that this is my third pad of agave paper, so it's only fair that they're included in this video. I love using this paper for line and wash and urban scenes. This is the only paper that granulation don't bother me as much for some reason. Their texture is so interesting and organic. I love it. However, this paper is extremely delicate. It doesn't tolerate almost any tape, including hahnemuhle's own tape. It doesn't tolerate erasing or rubbing off the masking fluid. So it's definitely a more high maintenance kind of paper. But for me, it's accessible, affordable, and I use it often. So I still love it. Moving on to watercolor brushes, my absolute favorite is still these two Da Vinci Casaneo flat brushes in a size 12 and 16. I use these in almost every portrait painting. I love them so much, I bought a size 8 to try out. But I feel like the number 8 didn't perform as well as the bigger ones. It wasn't as juicy and fluffy, especially on cold press paper. It sometimes leaves these dry marks, which is not my intention. But it's actually not that bad to use with gouache. And I've also been using these brushes Emily Hughes made together with Craft Hamel. These are gouache brushes, but I think they can be great for watercolor as well, especially in places I want very little water. I use this one for backgrounds a lot, and I must have not dried it properly because the ferrule is a bit loose now. So I fixed it with a piece of tape. It still works just fine. And I'm also just happy that it only happened to one of them. All the other ones are fine. This year, I also discovered the Da Vinci Fude brushes. They're really lightweight and very easy to control, and quite affordable too. So if I'm going outside to paint, I'll for sure bring these ones with me because I'm less precious with these. It's not a big deal if I lose or break one of them. I also love using these Rosa Oasis brushes. They're very versatile when it comes to how much water they can hold, so it's great for detail or smaller areas. The last one is Raphael's mop brush in the size 3/0. This is the smallest mop brush I can find, and I like it a lot, especially how thin the brush handle is. I can hold it very loosely, and I think it helps with mark making. It's also really great for aiming the splatters. Some brushes can be terribly unpredictable when it comes to splattering, like it can get everywhere. But not this one. This one is great. And I also feel the need to mention my water jars because I have very specific reasons. The bigger one is for dirty water. I started using this one because my cat, who hates water in general, just loves to drink dirty paint water. You know how it's like for them. It's just not tasty if it's not forbidden. So this jar prevents his face from getting in there, which I find hilarious. He eventually learned to dip his paw in there and lick it, so I always keep it shut when I'm not painting. The shape of the jar means that it's much less likely to be tipped over. I use a rubber band to secure a piece of cloth on its neck, so I can dry my brushes on it. I can also shake or shush my brush quite vigorously without the paint water splatters outside the jar. And it's very satisfying. I mean, I usually don't need to be that vigorous. It was, of course, exaggerated. However, if I'm in a situation that I need to clean my brush urgently, I know I don't need to worry about anything. Another great thing about this jar is it has these ridges on its neck. So when I clean my brushes with opaque watercolor or gouache in it, I can brush against these ridges to see if there's still any residue, and it just helps the brush to release the pigment. I feel the need to buy a couple of these jars just in case I break this one. I can no longer imagine painting without it, so it's not a bad idea to have some backups. The other jar for clean water is less important, I suppose. It's just the right size to have on my desk. From where I sit, I can see precisely how deep I'm dipping my brush in there, so it's very easy for me to control how much water I'm having on the brush. Alright, now let's take a look at my little gouache collection here. Despite having the most amazing paints, brushes, and books, I just still haven't found my groove with gouache yet. I guess I just don't have the right routine. Like for watercolor, it only takes me less than a minute to get started. I always have water on my desk, my palette and the paper, they are right there within reach. But somehow gouache is just not as easy to start for me. So I'm still in the process of finding a better approach. I'm not even sure if I can call this one of my favorite medium right now. It is something I'm really interested to learn and get better, but I'm not familiar enough with it to say what I like best about gouache. I like Winsor Newton, I also like Holbein, I think they're both really great. These brushes are also great. I think I just need to make more conscious effort to spend more time with this medium. The last thing I want to talk about is oil pastels. I usually prefer mediums that allow me to mix colors on a separate surface before putting them down on paper, kind of like watercolor, acrylics, or oil paints. I'm less interested in mediums like markers, where I have to choose new colors among many different colors. But oil pastels, they're obviously an exception for that. And I feel quite guilty that I have built a rather large collection within just 1 year. And I don't even use them that often. Personally, I don't have a favorite brand. I like to use them together. The 3 brands that I bought myself, Sennelier, Mongyo Gallery, and Culux, plus the Paul Rubens that was sent to me, they all have their own strength, and I will continue to use them together in the future. But one thing I do want to mention is this Talons oil pastel varnish. I think this one worked so much better than the Sennelier fixative spray. I never used varnish for oil painting before, so I can't tell if they're the same thing. This one says on the bottle it has a satin finish, and I like how it turned into like a shell within a day or two. So I can really recommend this if you have trouble storing your oil pastel paintings. The last thing I want to mention is my favorite paper for oil pastels. It is this Georgian oil paper from Dalarani. The texture is somewhat similar to a canvas. I think it's great value overall. I don't have any issue with using linseed oil or thinner on it, and it's also quite affordable. I got a bigger pad on Black Friday for about $11. And since I'm planning to start oil painting next year, there's gonna be a lot of swatching and exercises. This paper is just what I feel most comfortable with. Okay, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you had fun. It feels great to reflect on what I've been using this year. Hopefully it inspires you to use your art supplies as well. And I'm also super grateful for all of you who watch, like, and comment on my videos. You guys make me feel very welcomed in this YouTube art community. And also thank you for holding me accountable for this whole year. I can't wait to learn and grow together with you in 2025, and I will see you in the next one. Happy holiday and goodbye.